soon as my computer cooperates.
This meeting is being recorded.
The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Board of Behavioral Sciences Licensing Committee meeting. So today is March 26, 2021, and the time now is 1:01 p.m. This meeting is occurring at various locations pursuant to Executive Order N2520 dated March 12, 2020. And this public meeting will be held via a WebEx platform. So for now, moderator, would you please explain, how we can conduct the public comment portion of this meeting?
Absolutely. For this meeting, we will be utilizing the question and answer feature in WebEx for handling of public comments. At the time public comment is requested, I will open the Q&A panel, which you can access by locating the question mark inside of a square that is on your screen. From there, you would type, I would like to make a comment into the text field and submit that to all panelists. And we will be taking comments in the order that they are received. We will be allowing secondary comments, but only after all of the first time requesters have been addressed. And with that, I will turn it back over to Ms. Wong.
Thank you so much, moderator. And so let's have Christina Kitamura to help us establish the quorum.
Good afternoon. Susan Friedman? Susan, you're muted.
I'm present.
Thank you. Wendy Strack?
I'm here.
Christina Wong?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you so much, Christina. So at this time, let's do some introduction, and we will go with the board members first, and then the board staff. So I'm Christina Wong. I am an LCSW member and the chair of this committee. The next is Susan.
I'm Susan Friedman. I'm a public member of the committee.
Thank you. Wendy.
I'm Wendy Strack. I'm a public member.
Thank you. And let's go to, let's see, Steve.
Hi, Steve Sodergren, executive officer of the board.
Yes, do not use the old title. Roseanne?
Hi, hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm having some issues, it seems like, but Roseanne Howells, legislative analyst for the board.
Thank you, Roseanne. Christy.
Hi, Christy Berger, regulatory analyst for the board.
And Sabina.
Sabina Knight, legal counsel for the board.
And Christina, the last but not the least.
Christina Kitamura, administrative analyst for the board.
Thank you so much. And, for the public, when you come, on board for the public comments, just feel free to, to introduce yourself also. So at this time, I'd like to move to the third of our agenda item, which is to have an overview of the purpose of the committee and identification of issues for discussion. And I believe it's Roseanne.
Yes, so this committee was formed to take a look at some of the bigger issues that have to do with our licensing and exam process. We have a lot of laws and regulations regarding our exam process that we've tried to make better over the years. And there's a lot of rules that are in place that have been in place for a really long time that we get feedback on occasionally. So we wanted to talk about that, like kind of the history of what some of the items you're going to see here suggested for discussion. A couple of years ago, when we did our exempt setting committee, we had a big committee meeting down in, I believe it was Orange Committee, talked about in regard to licensure. And so a lot of those scope of can you hear me okay?
We're having a little bit of it's kind of hit and miss right now.
Yeah, it's a little glitchy.
Sorry.
Okay. That's okay. Are things better? It seemed to be better now. Everybody kind of disappeared off my screen for a minute, so I'll keep going and text me if there's an issue, I guess. So when we had that meeting down in Southern California, there were a lot of bigger issues that came up with regards to licensing and exams that we decided were, they were more longer term discussion issues. They weren't a discussion that could be resolved in 1 or 2 meetings. So we decided to form this committee. So in terms of some issues that I've identified for discussion, based on looking back at that meeting and conversations with staff and stakeholders, some things that we might wish to address. One thing, and we'll actually be talking about this a little later today, the 12-hour California law and ethics exam requirement for renewing registrants with a failing California law and ethics exam score. Also, the allowable age of a passing California law and ethics exam score. Currently, there's no limit in law as to the age of that. Whether California law and ethics exam attempts to be limited only to those pursuing licensure or those with a current or delinquent registration number or open application. So there's been some issues that have arisen or questions that have arisen related to that. Whether or not exam attempts to be limited, there's kind of an ongoing discussion on that. An issue that's come up regarding LPCC licensure about accepting the National Clinical Mental Health Counseling Examination and when to accept that. The board only accepts that after supervised experience hours have been gained, but we occasionally see students that have been permitted by other states or the military to take it early. And so the law doesn't really say it doesn't look like the law permits us to take it in those situations, and should we? And then the very big one, the 6-year limit on registration numbers, the prohibition on working on private practice with a subsequent registration number, and the requirement that the experience hours be no more than 6 years old. That's the subject of a lot of questions and concerns that we get, and they're together referred to as the 6-year rule. So those are the topics I've identified, kind of like what we did with the telehealth committee. I wanted to present those and then open it up for discussion to see if I missed anything that kind of pertains to the issues of licensing and examination. We tried to keep it a little bit narrow. There's a lot of, pretty much everything can be kind of said to be a licensing issue. We kind of tried to keep the topics a little bit interconnected, but definitely want to hear everybody's voice on that. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Roseanne. So this is a pretty comprehensive list, and definitely will take some time, to gather information and also, to craft a language. So I'm sure that we will have more discussion. So one thing that I talked about that, and wanted to, find the right forum, to discuss. It's really about the, required CEUs for the pre-licensures. So, it has always been, bits and pieces when the trend, a certain trend happens, certain incident happen, and then, legislation come and say, you have to do this. And so it's very similar, to like the suicide prevention, which is not a bad thing, but I think it is about time, to maybe did an overview, and see, whether, those, required classes, can be covered by, the educational institution, or, whether we can actually, utilize, some other topics or identify some more, pertinent topics, say, for example, telehealth, right? How do you do telehealth, and how do you do, how do you, really provide the quality services, that kind of stuff. So I think, it might be a good time to just think about, what really is, maybe we need a modernization, for the CE classes. So that's my input. So I'm gonna open it for the board members, and then the public will go next. So I'll go with, Wendy. So do you have any comments, any thoughts about the licensing committee discussion items?
I don't. The list that Roseanne offered is pretty comprehensive, and the items that you mentioned, some of these topics as a public member are new for me. So I look forward to learning more about them and deliberating on the issues, but I don't think I have anything to add right now.
Thank you, Wendy. And it's okay not to have anything to add because there's always the future agenda item. All right. And Susan? Susan, can you unmute yourself? Yes.
I think that I am in the same boat with Wendy as a public member. A lot of these issues are not familiar to me, but I think that I can think about them and make rational public thinking thoughts about them. I do think that that times are changing rapidly in front of our eyes, and so a lot of things are probably going to have to change along with the way the times are changing. And I'm happy to be part of the thinking on that.
Absolutely. It's like spring cleaning, right? We have to periodically, review, what needs to be kept and, what needs to be, organized. So this is about the timing. So this is why we have this committee. So wonderful. So let's open up for the public, to hear from their feedback. So moderator.
This is the moderator. We've opened the Q&A panel. If you'd like to make a public comment, please click on the Q&A icon on your screen. Type "I would like to make a comment" into the text field and submit that to all panelists. And our first comment comes from Ben Caldwell. Ben, your line is open. You will have 3 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you, committee and staff. Ben Caldwell, licensed MFT. Certainly appreciate your taking up this discussion. My only suggestion in terms of the list of topics there would be that topic on the NCM-HCE could potentially be broadened a little bit to look at clinical exams across the master's level professions to see whether we ought to revisit the timing of those exams. Under current law, you can't even apply for eligibility to sit for one of those exams until after you have completed all 3,000 hours of supervised experience. There is a trend in the mental health world to move those exams a bit earlier in the process. The way that the law currently is, because you can't apply until your 3,000 hours are already done, it often adds a significant amount of time on top of those 3,000 hours of supervised experience before someone can actually achieve licensure, because they have to go through the whole process of their application being evaluated, hours being approved, then scheduling an exam slot, preparing for the exam, and so on. If we could move the clinical exam earlier in the process, it would allow people to potentially achieve licensure more quickly without coming at the expense of those 3,000 hours of supervised experience that they, of course, still need to achieve. So certainly something we want to take a good holistic look at, but I just wonder if that item could be broadened a little bit. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Moderator, I think we can go to the next person.
Okay, our next comment comes from Jennifer Kolb. Jennifer, your line's open. You will have 3 minutes.
Hi, thanks. My name is Jennifer Kolb. I'm an LCSW. Thanks for allowing for participation today. Just wanted to comment on the law and ethics 12-hour requirement. Just being aware that legal and ethical issues is essential for competent clinical practice. So I believe it is important to continue if a person hasn't passed their law and ethics exam in the current renewal period. I believe it's important that they receive additional specialized training so that they can be successful in not only passing the exam, but more for the protection for client safety and public and competency overall. Thank you for allowing me to participate today.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Moderator, I think we're ready for the next.
Our next comment comes from Rebecca Gonzalez. Rebecca, your line is open. You'll have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Rebecca. Good afternoon. Rebecca Gonzalez, National Association of Social Workers, California chapter. I just wanted to point out, and I mentioned this to Steve the other day, that the Council of State Governments has chosen the social work profession to be in talks about having an interstate compact for licensure. The ASWB will be the lead agency, will be participating, and several states will establish agreements between their governing boards. I don't, know if California will be part of that or how this is all going to work, but I just wanted to make everyone aware that that is something that is happening and the social work profession has been selected for one of these compacts. Thank you.
This is such a good news. Thank you so much, Rebecca. And I think that was like one of the discussion topic at the telehealth committee. And so it's very timely. So thank you so much for sharing that. I think the moderator, are we ready for the next one?
Yes, we have one more, at least at this point, and this is coming from Jennifer Alley. Jennifer, your line is open. You'll have 3 minutes.
Good afternoon. This is Jennifer Alley with CAMP, the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists. And I would just like to know if there's any possible way that you could begin discussions on, the use of national exams more in California. Other than that, I think it's a great list of topics that's been outlined by BBS staff, and we look forward to participating in future discussions.
Thank you, Jennifer. So, moderator, do we cover everybody?
That's it. That's all we have for now. I will close the panel.
Thank you so much. So, what a great list of discussion topic. I hate to make staff work very, heavy workload, but at the same time, I think this is also a good time to just make sure that we cover everybody. And then we can pace and, prioritize other topics and then go from there. Yeah. So any other, before we close this topic, any other discussion or feedback, comments from the board members and the staff? Good to go, huh? Okay. All righty. So let's move to our next agenda item, and that is to talk about the 12 hours California Law and Ethics course. And that's the requirement for the renewal registrants with a failing score on the California Law and Ethics exams. So, and I believe that is, looks like it is Roseanne.
It's me. Yep. Okay. So we're just kind of kicking off with a topic here. So the California Law and Ethics course requirement. So we've talked about this in the past, and it's something that we continually get feedback on. So just kind of a brief overview. The board requires its marriage and family therapist, clinical social work, and professional clinical counselor registrants to take the California Law and Ethics exam a minimum of once each renewal period, so at least once a year until passed. They can take it more if they want. They don't have to, but they have to take it at least once a renewal period or once a year. If they pass it, then that's great. They're done with that exam. If they don't pass it, then they're still permitted to renew their registration. But once they renew their registration, to take that exam again in their next renewal cycle, like is required, they then have to show proof of completing a 12-hour California Law and Ethics course in order to take the exam again. A registration can be renewed up to 5 times, and after the 5th renewal, the applicant then has to obtain a subsequent registration number, and passage of the California Law and Ethics exam is required before they can obtain a subsequent registration number. And the reasoning behind that is because the board didn't want registrants, that they are seeing clients even though they're under supervision, but they wanted, after a reasonable period of time, the person to have demonstrated some knowledge and competency in California law and ethics, since they are seeing clients. So the board implemented the exam requirement, the 12-hour course for law and ethics, with the exam restructure back in 2016. And there have been some times when the course has been problematic or confusing. It does kind of create a layer of sort of complexity, or some might say bureaucracy, for associates in some cases. The reason that when we did the exam restructure, that was a result of an extensive committee review process for exams, much like we are doing now for this. In 2008, 2009, we had an exam review committee that totally ended up restructuring the exam process, and that signed into law and became effective in 2016. Originally, the 12-hour out of that committee, the committee had originally proposed the 12-hour course was going to be 18 hours, but it was reduced to 12 because an 18-hour course takes 3 days, and so there was concern about that. In addition, the original proposal also would have disallowed a registrant from renewing a registration if they didn't pass the L&E exam after 3 years. And then eventually that was changed to be for the subsequent registration number, so after 6 years. And I think again that was more for because it creates another layer of complexity if you're having a stop point sort of in the middle of the registration 6-year life. So that's kind of the evolution of what we have today. Some of the issues that we as staff here come up with the 12-hour law and ethics course. You can have registrants confused about when they need to take the 12-hour course. So what they need to do is renew and then take after failing, they renew and then they take the course. Some registrants don't realize that they need to take it or when they need to take it. So if they wait till the last minute and then they find their registration needs to be renewed for their job and then they haven't taken the course, that can be problematic from them in terms of they will have a lapse in their next renewal, and that could impact their employment. So we see that sometimes. And in addition, it adds costs to the registration renewal process. The cost of a registration renewal is now $150 per year across all license types. The cost to take the L&E exam is $150 per test. So tests can be taken every 90 days or up to 4 times per year if they fit it in perfectly. More likely they can take it 3 times per year. So there is some incentive if the person is failing, they might choose to take the course on their own because they want to pass the test. And if they do when they take the course, it does add another cost. I took a look at some of there's all kinds of courses out there from CE providers. Just kind of a common range. I saw courses kind of at the low end of $50. A lot of courses were kind of in the just over $100 range, up to like $135. So that's about how much that course can be. When we had discussed this previously, the board it was the Policy and Advocacy Committee had wanted to see some pass rates for the law and ethics exam. So I've included that in attachment A, and that data kind of shows you the percentage of people that passed it in year 1 by year, the percentage of people that passed it in the second year, and then so on and so forth. So you can see that after about year 3, really the majority of people have passed it on their own. And so there's a few outliers that it takes longer, but that's kind of what the data shows over the past few years since this has been in effect. So in terms of what the recommendation for discussion today, the committee might want to weigh whether requiring registrants who fail the L&E exam in a renewal cycle to take the 12-hour course provides a true public protection benefit or not. There's already some other public protection mechanisms in place that would remain in place. Registrants would still be required to attempt the California Law and Ethics exam every renewal period, so they have an incentive on their own to try to pass it. Registrants who are gaining hours toward licensure must always be working under a qualified supervisor. They can't obtain a subsequent registration number until they've passed the exam. And on another note, almost all applicants for a registration, both in and out of state, are required to take a law and ethics exam as an education requirement before their associate registration is issued. There is one exception to that, the marriage and family therapist under the old degree program. It was begun prior to August 1, 2012. Those applicants are subject to an older version of the law, which requires that coursework be completed before a license is issued. So there are a few subset of MFTs still going through the process with older degrees that may not have taken it until they actually get their license. But that number should be very small and kind of phasing out. So those are kind of some things to consider. And I know Steve has some thoughts about this as well, so that he'd like to add. So I will open it up for discussion.
So this is a perfect example that, we discussed about, the good intention, of the 12 units of the law and ethics course requirement, and yet the implementation is very problematic. Such a good example, so all these great ideas may not always work well. So I'm very interested in hearing Steve. So, maybe you can, share with us your thoughts and, before I
Yeah.
open up for public, for, the other comments.
This one's the first on the agenda because Roseanne's tired of listening to me complain about this. So thank you for getting on the first on the agenda. I think that the frustration is, and I'm sure that it's without there the associates too. When it originally came on board in 2016, I mean, it took us. We had so many meetings to try to figure out how this works, and today, still to this day, 4 years, 5 years later, we're still having to kind of wait. Is that when they have to take the 12-hour course? So, the least I think if we do, first of all, with the pass rates and stuff, I don't know what benefit it really offers, honestly. So I don't know if it's really a good requirement. Secondly, if we want to keep it the way it is, I would suggest that currently right now it's written into law where it is tied to an exam process. So you have to take that to get back in the exam process. I would suggest if for some reason we want to keep this as it is, we rewrite the procedure or the statute to tie it to the renewal instead. That would make it easier to understand. You don't pass the law and ethics during a renewal period, you take the 12-hour course, there you go. What we have now is a problem where somebody doesn't pass the course, somebody doesn't pass the exam, they can take the exam again in 90 days. But you have to, is that 90 days, does it fall within the certain renewal period you're in? If it's within the certain renewal period you're in, then you don't have to take the 12-hour course. But if you cross over your renewal period, then you have to take the 12-hour course. It's just very confusing to even talk about. I mean, to try to describe to candidates. So, that was our frustration, is trying to be able to explain to people when you have to take the 12-hour course, and then in background trying to monitor that to make sure we are capturing everybody and making sure they are taking that 12-hour course appropriately. So my big thing too is the public protection, yes, is great. My opinion on is I think I would prefer if we looked at possibly for the public protection is giving a fair chance to take and pass the exam. But I mean, if you're not able to pass the law and ethics exam by your 6th year, it's kind of a concern for me. So and also it kind of sets, I think it in essence it almost sets up people for possible failure, because if they cannot if they're not able to pass that law and ethics exam, they can't move forward. So there's another thing to consider with that's going further on to the exam itself. But the 12-hour course, it's very confusing. If we want to keep it the way it is, I would suggest that we kind of rewrite the language so that it's tied to the renewal and not tied to being able to take the exam again. The other thing that I liked that was brought up, and this is really not within this agenda topic, so I apologize, but if we are really looking, we had this discussion before, and Christina, you brought this up. If we're really looking for public protection, then I think we should do, instead of tying that 12-hour course to a failure of an exam, we should just make a CE credit that every associate has to take in law and ethics. 6 hours or something. I think what we had a plan when we were talking about this a while ago, it was thinking maybe 6 hours, every renewal period would be worthy. So anyhow, that's kind of what the 12-hour course, I would strongly suggest, first of all, maybe getting rid of it, the requirement. And if not, then definitely rewriting the language so it's not tied to the exam portion. And then for further discussions on another agenda topic, I think if we're really thinking about public protection, you know, requiring it as a CE instead of this 12-hour course, you know, tied to that exam.
So I'm glad you gave us some options.
There's some options there. Yeah.
No, I mean, it's, you know, it's a, I mean, it is kind of technical, but at the same time, I think it's also, you know, very important that we look at is like, you know, how do we implement it so that we can explain, you know, to the licensees, to the registrants clear, and yet also, you know, is, you know, that we have our public protection mandate. So, you know, I really like, you know, when you're talking about making a CE, it actually just, you know, kind of inspired me to think about like the licensees, you know, like me, hold a license. I have to take 6 units every renewal period as a requirement. You know, and that is actually really important because I don't necessarily remember all the law, even for myself, you know, deal with, you know, the BBS regulations. And so, you know, so I think that certainly, you know, is, you know, one of a possibility, you know, is just make it like, you know, licensees need to, you know, get that 6 units, maybe, you know, for all the, you know, all the associates, they need to take that. That is certainly, you know, I think it's a more equitable, you know, and it's actually kind of close up that, you know, that sort of like, you know, the discrepancy that, you know, oh, so associate doesn't, you know, once they don't have to pass a law on ethics. I mean, they don't have to, you know, worry about their law and ethics, right? You know, as far as they're under supervision. I think that is probably, you know, not quite, you know, not quite right. I mean, the thought is just kind of like, what, right? It's not quite consistent. And then I think, you know, in view of, you know, your second, you know, suggestion is to tie with the renewal period. You know, if let's say we want to keep the 12 units, I like that idea too. You know, so because I'm also looking at, you know, really interesting is that you know, after the 4th year, you know, at the 4th year, that basically, you know, it's not going anywhere. You don't pass. You know, it's very possible that, you know, that many of those people will not be able to pass it. So I don't know the reason, but I think that is kind of also very consistent with, you know, the you know, the second part of the you know, the clinical exam. And so after I think after the 3rd year is always the cutoff, you know, whether it's about test anxiety or whatever reason. And so, you know, so I think I was thinking about the other way. Let me just throw it in there, you know. It's like maybe, you know, the other, you know, maybe there would be something to do with like, you know, at the, you know, after year 4, you know, no, you know, after the year 3, maybe those associates will need to have some sort of, not just about the CE, but some sort of whatever, more so. I don't know what form it is, but maybe we need to actually target those people, you know, so we can actually maybe even rewrite the language. It's like, you know, if you don't pass, you know, the law and ethics by the 4th, you know, by the 3rd, is it the 3rd or the 4th? You know,
3rd year, I think we were talking about.
Yeah, after the 3rd year, yes, then we can kick off that, you know, 12 units. You know, so I think there are different ways that, you know, we can think about that.
And I think that was a bigger discussion too with the 3 years. How long do we want to let people, you know, take this exam? I mean, if it's a 3 year, 3 years, that gives them 12 chances to take the law and ethics exam. And that's a lot. So, but yeah, I guess so. Just to kind of, I think what we're looking at right now, I guess there's so much to talk about, and that's going to be another agenda topic. It's like, do we want the 12-hour course, and where are we going to go from here? I mean, that's kind of, we can kind of look at that. So,
well, we're putting all the options out here, you know, so that we can like pick and choose. And so, Roseanne.
Yeah, let's let Roseanne bring us back in.
That's right.
Well, I'm not sure bringing you back in. I think it's totally legitimate to consider if you wanted to consider a CE every year, a 6-hour CE for associates every year. I think that's totally in the scope of this item. So that's fine. The other thing that I've heard mentioned before, and I don't know how people would feel about this, this is even a little bit stricter, but in a way it's a little bit, is, you know, requiring passage of the L&E to become an associate. That way everybody takes it when they're fresh out of school, they've had their education, they should have all that information fresh in their minds, and then they've proved that they're fit to, they know law and ethics to see clients. So that's another possibility that I've heard discussed.
Yeah, right. And Steve?
Just on that one too, I'll be talking to OPES. Kind of, I know that they had concerns about although I think it sounds like a great idea of having somebody take the law and ethics before you get an associate's number, because I've always been kind of leery where they're taking an exam that's supposed to show competence in a certain area, and if they're not passing it 6 years, we're allowing somebody that may not be competent in the law and ethics to practice for 6 years. But there's definitely issues I have to learn about, and about, you know, it's the type of exams and when you give them, and so there's more appropriate, and I think there's concerns about the original, but that was one of the other thoughts too. So
yeah,
just to head back on that.
Susan, can you unmute yourself, please?
Sorry.
No, it's fine.
Anyway, sorry about my hoarse voice, but I think what Roseanne said makes total sense, that they should take this exam right when they finish school, before they get their associate license. I'm very curious though, can the law and ethics, can it be separated? Is there a law part and an ethics part? Because they are two very different subjects.
They do, in the criteria area for that's being tested, there are, I believe, they are divided. But I mean, they do bleed. It's really kind of, they bleed into each other. So I wouldn't suggest doing any kind of, splitting out of it. So, and that's what we did with the exam restructure. We kind of split out the law and ethics portion and put it on the front end, so associates pass it. And then really the clinical exam is dealing with, although it does have some law and ethics, you know, concepts in there, it has a lot of it's more of the practice type of questions and theoretical such. So that's what we did with the exam restructure. So, which was a good move, I think.
Yes, from the practitioner point of view, you know, and yes, it is truly two very separate things. Law, you know, practice lawfully, and, you know, what is law, what is ethics. And yet, you know, in our profession, everything is kind of like, you know, it's very gray. And so, yes, there is definitely a law, but at the same time, you know, what really is also the ethical practice. And so things are very gray. So law and ethics, you know, inevitably, you know, has to kind of like mix together. And so, and also the law and ethics exam is not necessarily just about what you know about the law. It's not, you know, that it's really about the clinical judgment. And so, you know, in this situation, what would you do? And so, you know, so it's, you know, so I think that's a good suggestion, but I don't think, you know, at this point that separating these two, you know, will be helpful, you know, to protect our consumers.
No,
So,
I wasn't suggesting that you separate. I'm just curious if they were separate, because I haven't taken the exam. But I think Roseanne's idea about doing it right when people get out of school makes a lot more sense.
Yes. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Susan. I mean, you know, that's why we have public members, you know, to really ask this kind of questions. So, you know, and have some good suggestion about that. So thanks, Susan. And Wendy.
Yeah, I think what struck me about Steve's comments is if there's not even clarity for staff about the current requirements, then clearly there's something that needs to change, because I don't know how licensees can can navigate if we're even struggling as an agency about implementing it. I don't think I'm comfortable with removing the requirement altogether. I think some of because there's that scenario that Steve talked about where somebody could conceivably be practicing for 6 years, not having passed this and not being required to take any additional coursework about it. So that doesn't feel right to me either. So I think some of these other solutions, either taking it, in order to get their associate registration, or tying it to the renewal, excuse me, or the CE course, or some combination of those, makes a lot of sense to me. Or even, adding this extra requirement, Christina, that you talked about, maybe after year 3, because clearly there's some challenges there that we need to provide some support on. But I think a lot of those resonate and could work a little better. But then just as a clarification point for me, do they have to take this 12-hour, under the current law, do they have to take this 12-hour course every time they fail?
No, not every time. So here's the way I explain it. So let's see how. So it's really when this. So we have to. I use the application. So the first time that you are submitting a re-exam application after you've been renewed, you have to show proof of the course. Once you do that and you get your re-exam application approved, if you fail during your renewal period, you can take the exam every 90 days until you hit that mark again where if you get renewed, then you have to show the 12-hour course and then submit your re-exam application. So yeah, so it's not every time.
Right, but it's still pretty confusing even for registrants to figure out when they didn't pass the exam versus their renewal period. It could be pretty dicey.
And that's what I said. Like if we are don't want to proceed on really moving forward on doing something drastic on this, is at least we could say, as a registrant, you have to take the exam. If you fail before you can renew, then you have to show proof or either attest to the fact that you've taken a 12-hour course. And then we can I prefer the attestations because then we can audit. It's not another extra paperwork for the associate or us. We can audit that and look at that to see if they did take the exam. I took the course and then go from there. So. But just tying it to that renewal would be better then. So.
Okay, thank you.
My turn. Go ahead, Roseanne.
Just to chime in with what Steve said, I wholeheartedly agree with him that I think that it would be a lot less confusing for applicants to have to do it upon, before they renew. That makes it easier to remember. It's easy for staff to explain. I would want to caution, I think I want to bring back a little bit of history from what I can remember about the after 3 hours requiring additional coursework then. From what I recall when we were having those discussions is that the 3 hour, so the board is very aware of where somebody is in their registration process, whether they're at 1 year or 2 year or 3 years. Registrants aren't necessarily as aware of where they are, if they're on year 1, year 2, year 3. So that does kind of set up, we already have the 6-year thing. And so having a 3-year, I think the concern at the time was it kind of creates another hurdle that's just going to come up and could catch people off guard. So that was why at the time, not that it's necessarily a bad thing, but that was why at the time I think we went away from that, because administratively, in terms of stat, we don't really have the capability to be like, hey, well, you are coming up on your 3rd, renewal, so we're gonna, they're just gonna hit that requirement, and it's gonna be a surprise. So.
Yeah, it's true. So I think, what, I am actually thinking more and more about, the doability. I don't even think that is a word, but I like to make it doability, of the, of the fact that, maybe, just to make it very simple, is that requirement about the 6 units every year for the associates. And then, because they, they renew their clinical license every year. And so, and that actually, it makes sense, because oftentimes I think the length of time for them, for them to, most of them is about like 3-something years, for them to acquire their, reach their clinical supervision hours, and then they will move to, forwards for their examination. And so I don't think that will become like such a new burden for them, if everybody, will be taking that, at the renewal period. And then when they're licensed, then they move towards like once every other years for the 6 units. It's actually make it very, very consistent, and I'm sure that, when people really have a hard time, of doing, passing the law and ethics examination, if we can make it on their own, because, if we have that in place already, then I don't think that, we actually necessarily need to tell them that, after the 3rd year, then you should actually go get some more training. They're all adults. I think, that would be the direction that they would be going anyway, if they want to have the exam. So I'll have Wendy and then Roseanne.
Roseanne may answer my question as part of hers, but could we combine the two where for associates, we require the passage of the exam before they get their registration and require the CEs, or is that too much? Just as a clinician, Christina.
You could. I mean, I don't know. I'd be interested to see what the stakeholders think about that. Yeah, that's definitely, I mean, the 6 units every year for everybody is, as like a CE, is definitely a viable option. Requiring the exam up front and then requiring the 6 units every year is a viable option too. Those are both things that could be done. It's not out of the question for sure. What I wanted to say about the 6-year course, or the course too, is that I forgot what I wanted to say. Shoot. Those are definitely open for discussion. I'd be interested to see what stakeholders have to say. Oh, I know what I was going to say. I was just going to say that, even if somebody passes the law and ethics exam early, if they continue with their registration number, I think that the 6-year CE course, the 6-unit CE course would provide a good safeguard, because like look at like versus this time last year in telehealth. I mean, the profession and the law and the ethics changes quickly. And so there's always law changes, and there's always, something new that those courses could talk about. So I don't think it's necessarily bad or burdensome to have a refresher.
Yep. Thanks, Roseanne. And Steve, go ahead. And then Christy. Yeah.
Just one more thing too on the, like I said, I think there is, and I can't express what they are right now, but the concerns, even though I like the idea, and I was kind of a proponent, or I'd be proponent of it, of taking the exam before you actually, receive your registration. It's kind of going to what Christina, you were mentioning that you can get out of school, and maybe because you took the law and ethics class, or a class that was, in law and ethics, you could pass the exam. But what we really want to make sure is that you can actually practice those. And so I think taking the exam before the registration, you're not really testing their, applying those law and ethics concepts to your practice. I think that was one of the concerns, but we can definitely keep talking about it. And then the 6-hour course, I think that's a really good point, is that I want to get these associates at an early point in their licensure where they understand that you really do need to keep in tune with what's going on with the laws and your practice. Because we do see I think a lot of people don't really take that into effect. And one of the ideas, and this is, I don't think it'll put work on Roseanne necessarily, so I'm going to mention it, is that, we could actually do something internally. And I know there's boards that do this, where we would actually on a yearly basis do our own our own law and ethics course. I don't know if it would be 6 hours necessarily, but basically where they would have to actually go and sit through and watch the video and do the whole law and ethics, where we could, highlight all the new laws that came up and such. So it can make it less burdensome on the associates than having to go out and get a 6-hour unit. So that's another idea I've been thinking about. So that.
So maybe, what you're saying seems to me that it's like, it's only fair that if, let's say, the associates takes 3 units per year, and then that will equate 6 units, just like the licensees, because it's 3 units is actually shorter, so, and I'm sure that, if that, that is the idea, then the CE providers out there, they can really just focus on maybe like a 3 units class, to really highlight, the new law change, and just to keep updating it. And so, I mean, there are different ways that, we can make it very equitable, and it's very fair across board, to accomplish the public protection mission. So I want to hear from Christy, and then maybe we will open up for the public comments part of it. So Christy?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to, voice that I have similar feelings to everyone else on all of this. Having been the person that developed the re-exam form, we put a flow chart. I mean, we did the best we could to explain it, and it's still, anyway. So yes, I'm so happy we're having this discussion. I did want to also talk a little bit about the requiring the exam before they get a registration. I really like that idea. It would simplify so many things. I mean, but it brings up other issues. There would be things we'd have to work out, like how soon can you take it? How much time, because some people are working and they want that continuity. And so there would be some issues like that to work out. And I think maybe even if it doesn't test at quite the same level, maybe that's okay, especially if that goes hand in hand with an ongoing CE requirement. And the other thing I just wanted to mention, and Christina, you covered this, is that licensees take 6 hours every 2 years. So maybe 3 hours a year is something to consider instead of 6. So anyway, that's what I just wanted to talk about.
I am so glad that we are really started to form some, options, pretty concrete options out there. And so this is really wonderful. I'm very excited. So at this point, I would like to, pass it to our moderator to open the Q&A. But at the same time, it seems like, I'm hearing some noises that maybe we need to have you explain, to the, how to ask a question and, that public comment part of it. So if you can explain it once more, I think that would be really great for the public. Moderator?
Sorry, my computer was stuck for a moment.
I think we all experience it today.
All right, we have opened the Q&A panel for requests for public comment. If you'd like to make a public comment, please click on that Q&A icon on your screen. Type "I would like to make a comment" into that ask field and submit that to all panelists. Our first comment comes from Ben Caldwell. Oh, come on, computer. All right, Ben, your line is open. You will have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Ben Caldwell, licensed MFT. Again, really appreciate this discussion. And as you're running into, there's a lot here. In terms of Roseanne and Steve, what you were talking about with the implementation, I feel your pain, because I think I and the other stakeholders on this meeting will say that we all have this experience of trying to explain to people when you need to take the 12-hour law and ethics, and it is so complicated to communicate that correctly and effectively. Even if we have an understanding of when it needs to be, getting that across in a way that people understand, it's just a huge challenge. I do think that associates benefit from that 12-hour requirement. I'm an approved CE provider through CAMP's CE provider approval program, And one of the courses that I offer is the 12-hour course for folks who need it. So there's certainly an element of self-interest here. But I get emails on a regular basis from folks who say that they did the course and wound up valuing it not just because it helped them with the exam, because it deepened their understanding of the underlying issues impacting their practice. And that's, you know, as a stakeholder in the profession, that's what I care about. It's not about checking off a box. It's about, are you really truly understanding how these things apply to the work that you're doing with your clients? So I think in my ideal world, I'd suggest keeping that 12-hour requirement, and as Steve was suggesting, tying it to renewal, as opposed to tying to a particular exam attempt. If you do decide to let go of the 12-hour requirement, then I really like the idea of 3 hours of ethics CE each year for associate registration renewal. Requiring continuing ed is not unusual for pre-licensees in other states. I know Washington does it, some other states do as well. And it is sort of good habituation to let people know you've got to keep current on these issues. When it comes to requiring the exam maybe before the registration number is issued, I see what you're saying in terms of the potential benefits structurally, but it does raise a whole host of other concerns. In particular, for those folks who are gaining hours on the way to licensure, how would that interact with the 90-day rule and hours gained in between graduation and issuance of that initial associate registration? Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Another very good point about the 90 days rules. Totally right on. So thank you so much. So moderator, you know, we can bring on the next person.
All right. Our next commenter is Diana Herwick.
That name
Diana,
sounds
your
so
line
familiar.
is
Yeah, go ahead.
your line is open. You'll have 3 minutes. And if I can remind you before we're completely done here, if you could please lower your hand.
Oh, yep. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't know where the Q&A was, so I did that.
Okay.
I think my questions might have been kind of covered here, but Ben, you brought up the 90-day rule, and so I'm glad you did that. I don't think I would be a huge supporter of needing to do the exam before getting their registration, because we have so many trainees who move straight into their associateship and they want to continue at the same agency and working with the same clients. And I just worry about continuity of care and agencies trying to figure out how to get their needs met. So that's my concern with that. And also, as far as the 3-hour CE, while that sounds interesting, I don't think there's that many good law and ethics courses right now that are that small. You know, you can only cover such little information in that amount of time. And so I would be worried that it would kind of just be like busy work, but not really beneficial for them. That's it. Thank you.
And Diana is actually our board members, but she's coming, you know, as a public member to give comments. So thank you so much, Diana.
Thank you.
So, so moderator, back to you. Any other public commenter?
That was our last request. I'll close the panel.
Thank you so much. Okay, so, you know, so in that sense, you know, it looks like we really are, you know, moving to, you know, I mean, we have some really good options here. And so, you know, so do you want the committee to make a more definitive recommendation, or what do you think that will be the best way to proceed?
I feel like we're really close on this. I feel like the options are either align keep the 12-hour course requirement if the exam is failed, but align it with renewal instead of taking the exam again, or get rid of the 12-hour course requirement completely and instead have a requirement for either 3 or 6 hours of CE in law and ethics every year for everybody. So I guess my question is there a preferred one?
Yeah, right. So, so that's wonderful. So, you know, in that sense,
this is the moderator. We
yes.
did have one person who snuck in a request for comment right as I was closing the Q&A panel.
Oh, okay. So we can bring that, that person on board.
Okay, that would be Jennifer Alley. Jennifer, your line is open. You'll have 3 minutes.
Well, thank you, moderator. I don't think that I'll need the full three minutes. This is Jennifer Alley with CAMP. I think this has been a really good and thoughtful conversation. The existing 12-hour requirement is very confusing. But we do agree that, something needs to be in place to ensure that, all practitioners, associates and licensed understand the law and ethics that they are providing treatment to, and that training and exams are a part of that. I really need to defer to the CAMP smart people to kind of get a definite idea of what it is we would be behind, whether it's 3 hours every year. Heard the confusion on the 90-day rule on when to take the exam, but I just really thank the committee and the other stakeholders for the very thoughtful discussion.
Thanks, Jen. You're always so, complimentary to us. And I want to thank you for, just also, some very clear, perspective too. So, in that sense, so maybe we can sum up, some of the options here. And I think we can probably just look at it one-on-one and then see, what the board actually, the committee, would recommend. So, and I think, primarily it will be, I think the newest, recommendation is to have the examination, come before, at the very beginning of the license, of the registration. So, it seems like, we talked about that a lot. And, and yet there's some, pretty challenging technical difficulty right here. And so I wonder, if that would be, I think it's more from the staff. It's like, whether you see that as a, doable, Roseanne's shaking her head. Go ahead. Roseanne and then Steve.
I feel like the 90-day rule is a really good point. I don't see how we could reconcile that with that. I hadn't thought of that before, and that's why we have these meetings, which is really helpful. But there is a big concern when we've had discussions about the 90-day rule in the past. The reason we have that is because there is a very big concern about continuity of care across that. And I think that requiring this is just my opinion, requiring it up front and having the 90-day rule would be problematic.
Okay. Steve?
I don't know what I was going to say, but I kind of, that's true. The 90-day rule, it does throw kind of a wrench in that idea. And plus I think there's also, like I was stating, I think there is concerns about, when you take that exam and if it's really testing if it's really, psychometrically sound, if you're taking it at a certain period. So if we definitely would want to have a greater discussion on that if we were thinking about that. That being said, I think like the choices you were saying, Roseanne, it's do we, keep the 12-hour course or not? And then, the discussion is now, okay, then or do we do 6 units? What do we do on the CE? I think that's where we're at right now.
Right. Okay. Wendy?
Sorry, trying to find my button there. So I think the stakeholder comments and the feedback and staff's feedback was really helpful, especially as a public member, to kind of understand the process. So I think from what I heard, including the requirement to take the exam before the licensure point doesn't seem to work logistically. So I'm okay with kind of moving past that point, and that's probably why it was considered and discarded before. It also struck me during the comments that nobody really spoke against the requirement, the 12-hour requirement itself. It was more about the process. So, maybe it's not worth throwing out the baby with the bathwater yet. Maybe we kind of refine the process to make it, it's kind of where I'm kind of shifted during the comment period was, maybe we look at the process instead of the requirement, because I don't think we had anybody say that the requirement was a problem.
Yeah, it really is the process, and so, maybe, I'm just going to throw it out there. Maybe one thing you can do is like, you need to take 12 units of the renewal period. And then once you get past your exam, then you can actually take the 3 units or 6 units or whatever. I mean, Steve gave me that look, but I'm just kind of like make things complicated. I know. Roseanne, go ahead.
I'm going to complicate it a little more, and I don't know exactly where this is going, but something to keep in mind as we move this through this committee, we're going to be discussing some other things, and some of those other things are in line. The subject of CE for registrants has come up before, and it's come up in discussions of the length of renewal, how long you can have a renewal, which we're going to be discussing. It's come up in discussions of how long an exam score is good for and second registration numbers. So I think that I don't know how those discussions are going to play out, but I think that is on a track where we might possibly be headed anyways. So just to keep that in mind.
So Steve, go ahead.
Just one more. So I'm thinking with that, because I was kind of thinking that too in the frame of mind. I'm thinking, because it does sound like the CE is an important thing. Everyone's agreeing on that. I'm thinking honestly that maybe even though the 12-hour course is something I really want to see changed, instead of utilizing the time to figure out where it's better situated, I mean, maybe that's the discussion we should have next. Do we require CE? Are we going to want to require CE units every year of an associate renewal? And then if we say yes, then I think we look back at, okay, do we really need that 12-hour course? I think that might be the better. Is that where you're kind of hinting at, Roseanne?
I'm thinking of it more along the lines of, I don't know where we're going to end up, but just the way that I'm feeling, I kind of feel like the 12-hour course, if somebody's habitually failing the law and ethics exam and having to pay money to fail it again, there's kind of a incentive for them to take coursework anyways, to try to, what do you do if you don't like your SAT score? You take a course to raise your score. I don't know that we necessarily need a requirement for that. By having the let's say a 6-hour CE course already in place, I would suggest writing that in and the 12-hour course out for now, and then at the end of this, because we're not doing anything right now, we're going to continue on with other topics. At the end of this, we can revisit how it all looks, and if we like how that looks still. If we say, well, this is horrible, we need that 12-hour course, which I don't think will happen, then we can write the 12-hour course back in. But I think that the way we're going, the 6-hour CE is a better option.
Right. So it's a reverse, exactly reverse from what Steve recommended. But I also feel that that I think the 6 units is gaining a little bit more traction, and so so if we I really think that it is also part of the, the bigger picture, since I was the one who said that we need to, have a modernization of the CE requirements. And so, but at the same time, I also feel that, because it is such a good continuation, I have not heard any, objection that, the 6 units is a really good number because it's consistent. So, so I feel pretty comfortable that if we, let's say, toss at 12 hours, right? And put that 6 units of every renewal period for the associates, for now. And I think that actually might, take care of the consumer protection, take care of the, the not passing examination, all these things. And also, since there is a requirement, so majority of the people will move on, to the regular licensing track, and then and that requirement is still there. And so I think it's actually probably the most ideal, and also take care of the confusion, make it so simple. And then, when there's auditing and whatnot, then I think, that would help the staff, to explain, Ben doesn't have to worry about answering the same question, and so does Steve. So, so I think this is probably, to me, is like the most viable option. So what do you think? Steve?
One more thing on public protection, and actually, I just had to say this on public protection. It actually offers more public protection because if I get in there and pass my law and ethics exam right after I get my associate number, I don't have to pay attention to those statutes and the laws. And so this does actually put that in there after you pass the exam, which we see 80, 75, let's say 70, 75% of people pass it right off the bat. So it's that 70% of people will then be captured back into the law and ethics to actually have to, look at that. So I'm done.
So Roseanne?
And I agree with that, because we are going to, and this is another discussion topic, but it might make that discussion topic easier. We don't have a limitation on how old a law and ethics exam score can be right now. It can be 30 years old. Now, would it be? Probably not, but we will get one or two occasionally that are very old as time goes on. And, maybe that if an older score is less of a worry if the requirement is to take, maybe we still want to limit on it. We can discuss that when that topic comes up, but maybe it's not as much of a worry if there is a CE course being required at the same time.
Wow, look at how complicated it is. But I think we need to move forward, and it seems to me that, all these consideration, really is important, because, there's always, I think that's what I learned about the law. There's always, if you overlook one aspect, then there is a lot more unintended consequence and more to clear up, than not. And so I'm thinking that, maybe it's time to make a motion, right? So I'll make a motion, to recommend to the board, to require the associates to take 6 units of continuing education of law and ethics at every renewal period, and delete the requirement of the 12 units of CE when the associate did not pass the law and ethics examination. Wow.
I'll second.
Thanks, Wendy. Right? Wow, that is pretty cool. I'm glad. One shot. Don't ask me to repeat it again. Okay, so moderator, I would like to open for the public comment, for any feedback. Any other public comments?
This is the moderator. We've again opened the Q&A panel. If you'd like to make a comment, please click on that Q&A. I can't talk this afternoon. The Q&A icon on your screen. Type "I would like to make a comment" into the text field and submit that to all panelists.
I'm not seeing any. Very
Not
nice.
seeing any either.
I know. Wow. So wonderful. So I'm very happy, about, that we were able to come up with this, motion. So Christina, would you please take vote?
Absolutely. Susan Friedman,
Yes.
Wendy Strack,
Yes.
Christina Wong,
Yes.
motion carries.
Right. So our next step is for Roseanne to, prepare some language, and then we will see it again at the next meeting.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you so much. Wow, this is really wonderful. I love it. Okay, so I will proceed to the next agenda item, which is public comments for items not on the agenda. So moderator, would you please open the panel?
It is open.
Yay.
So if you'd like to make any public comments on items that were not on today's agenda, please click on the Q&A icon on your screen. Type "I would like to make a comment" into the Ask field and submit that to all panelists.
I don't see any so far.
I see none either.
All right, then, let's remain let's keep the Q&A open, and
Okay.
then I will move forward to the suggestions for future agenda items. And we can do the public, and then we can come back to the board members.
Okay, we will pause for just a few more moments in case anybody would like to submit a request for future agenda items.
I am seeing none.
Everybody's quiet suddenly.
I know, right? Okay, it's Friday afternoon. All righty. So I want to come back to the board members. Don't want to skip you all. And so, thanks, moderator, for closing the panel. Thank you so much. And the board members, any suggestion for future agenda items? Nope. Shaking head. And I will just make sure, board members, any public comments for items not on the agenda? Just want to make sure in case I asked it. I don't think I did. Okay. No? Okay. All righty. So, again, come to our, most favorable, loving, beloved agenda item, which is called adjournment. So the time now is 2:17. And thank you so much for participating in this very wonderful discussion. And we will see you next time at the licensing committee meeting. And thanks all the hard work for the staff. Bye.